What's up, fellow music nerds? Matrix here, and you're locked into the Matrix Music Podcast, the only place to get your fix for all the new country and alternative music. And we made it. We're here. First episode. Really excited to get this podcast rolling and hopefully share some new music, new artists with everybody and see what y'all think about some of this new music that's coming out. So let's talk about how this podcast is going to be structured first, because country and alternative can release a lot of music at the same time. So how we're going to work is we are going to do a genre a week. So for example, this week we are going to talk about alternative, and then next week you can tune in and we'll be talking about country music. It's also a way for us to give our listeners a chance to determine whether or not they really want to listen to everything. Hopefully everybody wants to listen to both sides, but I do understand that some people are just here for alternative and some people are just here for country. So with that being said, I will also answer the question of any country music that's been released this week. We will address next week in those reviews as well. Chase Rice, Matt Stell, those types, they'll still be included in next week's show with the new releases. And then the same thing goes for alternative. Anything released next week will be in those show after that. So we will talk about every episode with album reviews, single reviews, and if we have any tour announcements or any news that pops up throughout the week, we'll talk about that as well. So with that, let's jump right into it and let's jump into some album reviews. We had a huge drop this week in alternative with the first album that we reviewed, and that is This Is Why by Paramore. So Paramore returns with a really strong entry in the alternative field this week. Obviously, we have not heard from them in a while, and when we have, we weren't really quite sure. It was more Haley solo stuff than it was the band together. And this album was interesting to listen to the first time through. I wasn't quite sure how I felt about it, and it was one of those that it definitely grew on me as I listened through. It really signified the growth that Paramore has come into, and they've kind of come into their own and developed from that band that we all knew and loved that had that really angsty sound and really was driving with the electric guitar and driving with the drum beats to a more mellow style, but we still get that angst in the lyrics that we get from Paramore. It's almost like they have matured the way that we have wanted some of our elder emo bands to mature. We haven't seen that a whole lot just yet in this genre. We've seen some attempts at this with different bands like Panic, and even Fall Out Boy is trying to do that this year, hopefully, and develop a little bit. But I'm not sure that we will see it to the level of success that we are likely to see with Paramore. This album from Paramore really allows the listener to sit back and relax and listen to the lyrics and really engage. It's a really engaging listening experience for this album because Paramore touches on a lot of topics that I think everybody feels and experiences throughout their lives and throughout the day. And they spin it into these different sounds and these different styles that you may not expect from a, so to speak, emo band, but it's just a more mature version of that sound. You know, for example, one of the first tracks on this album is called The News. And The News is basically talking about all of the different things that we hear day to day in the news stories. And a couple of the lyrics from it that kind of stuck out to me were basically there's a whole flow of how are we going to, we're donating all this money to these different causes, but all these causes that are happening are so far away. And I'm sitting here in the safety of my room, in the safety of my house, and wondering if I'm even really making a difference. And that's something that kind of resonated with me right away, is that, sometimes we get overwhelmed and overstimulated by all these different news stories, and it's in our human nature to want to just jump right in and help. Whereas sometimes when we sit back and look at it and think back to all this help that we gave, was it really, did we even do anything? Am I helping in any way, shape, or form? So it was one of those songs that made you sit back and think about some of the things that are going on in the world. And it just shows that lyrical and that lyrical growth and that maturity from Paramore that I think we can see that's evident all the way throughout this album. And the lyrics are really what stood out on this album for me. The lyrics are where I saw the most growth. Um, just a couple of lines that stood out that I wrote down were, there's one that talks about hitting snooze for the 20th time, and it's kind of really just an excuse for your lateness. And as a chronic snooze button hitter myself, I can attest to hitting the snooze button probably 20 times and then being late to work and saying, oh yeah, I was late because I hit the snooze button, or, I turned the alarm off, whatever it may be. It's something that everybody has done before in their life. Another lyric that stood out, and probably my favorite lyric on this entire record, was, he's a smooth operator in a shit-stained suit. And that's coming from the song Big Man, Little Dignity. And if that is not the perfect explanation of just an absolute horrific human, somebody that just tries to smooth talk their way out of everything, but you can see on the outside that they're really just not a good person. They're always just going to try and smooth talk themselves through whatever situation it is. I don't know if there's a better representation of that we're going to see, especially in the music world. So kudos to Haley on that one for that line. That was an amazing line that I don't think I ever would have expected to hear in a song ever. So, and then another one that I saw, and I don't remember which song it's from, there's a line that says, all it took to cry was being alive. And that's a line where I feel like a lot of people can sympathize with. Sometimes you just end up crying and somebody may ask, oh, what's wrong? And you're just like, life is wrong. And that's something that, it's a hard thing to approach, but sometimes you just have that overwhelming feeling and you just need to break down, and you don't necessarily know why it is, or you don't know what it is that's causing you to feel like this. You just know that right now life is what's causing me to feel this way. So just another example of all of this growth that we got from Paramore. And I know that I keep talking about how much they grew, but that's because this is the type of growth that we wanted from bands in this genre. This is the type of growth that other bands that have been around this genre for a while can use as a blueprint on a successful way to move forward and a successful way to stay relevant. I feel like a lot of times bands get stuck in this middle ground where they feel like they either can't try something new and they still revert back to those old ways, and that may or may not click depending on the sound and the lyrics and all of that, just because they've gotten older, or they strive for the more mainstream things and they end up not really selling out, but they're catering more towards trying to get radio airplay, which unfortunately in this genre is not as easy as it was in the past. This is not the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, where we're going to hear a song like Thanks for the Memories or Misery Business on the radio. That's just not the world that we live in anymore. So a lot of bands will try to cater to that. And I feel like that's exactly the type of growth that we saw from Panic on their last record, where they were trying to cater more to the safe, hopeful, radio-friendly route. Whereas if they would have just taken a step back and said, let's make something that we really like and that we really can sympathize with, they may have had a better received record. I feel like a lot of people got that record and felt that it was just not genuine. It was not something that Panic really wanted to make. It was just something that they made. And you can tell from this record that this is something Paramore wanted to make. And they even included a lot of different funky beats in this record, which is something that you wouldn't expect to say for Paramore. They have more of the charged sounds is what I will call them. We had songs like Crush, Crush, Crush. We had songs like Misery Business, and we had songs, all throughout that whole Riot album where there was just a really charged tone to it and charged sound to it. Whereas on This Is Why, this is a more polished record and a more there's not as much electric guitar on this record as you would expect, but the beats that are funky still get you kind of up and moving, and you can definitely get yourself into a space where you repeat them over and over again. And I definitely had that happen with different songs. The title track, This Is Why, is one that definitely you can hear yourself singing over and over again. But the surprising one for me was C'est Comme Ça, which when I first heard that song, I was like, uh-oh, this is an annoying song. Definitely not going to listen to this a whole lot. And Paramore has this way about them of basically giving you earworms in their hooks. And that's exactly what we got with C'est Comme Ça, because even though I didn't like the song right away, I found myself later on in the day humming or singing that tagline. And eventually it becomes one of my favorite songs off of this whole album because of just that catchiness and that earwormness. And these are the type of songs that you would expect to do well on radio, but they're not going to, just because of, as I said, there's not really a whole lot of alternative music on the radio. Now, I know Paramore's supposed to open up for Taylor Swift on a couple of her era shows. That's great exposure. Maybe throughout that process, they will gain some traction on one of those songs. But even though they may not get the commercial radio airplay or the mainstream airplay, this is an album that has a bunch of songs that will likely become streaming stars. And my favorite track off of this album is You First. And basically the whole story behind that is karma's going to come, but hopefully it comes for you first. And again, situations that we've all expected, all experienced, and definitely situations that we all can sympathize with. We hope karma comes for everybody, but we hope it comes for that other person first. So Paramore's album overall was really strong. Like I said, it was one of those that I really didn't know what to think the first time through. And then after a couple listens, I really enjoyed it. So definitely an album that I recommend. Go check it out if you haven't already. Paramore, This Is Why. That leads us to our next album that we reviewed, and that is Pierce the Veil's The Jaws of Life. Now, Pierce the Veil is a band that we have not gotten a ton of new music from lately, so when we hear that there's a new album out, everybody's expectations and excitement goes way up. And this is an album that I really didn't know how to respond to. My experience with Pierce the Veil is that they have been a little bit on the heavier side. I haven't really heard them dive into an anthemic rock side, which is what I feel like a lot of this album was. We get the first track, Death of an Executioner, and when I first heard that song, the first thing that I thought of was, I feel like I've heard this song before. And it took a couple of listens through to finally pick up on what song it was that I was thinking of. And the song that I was thinking of was The Uprising by Muse. Now, those two songs are not super similar, but they are similar enough that it made me stop and think, is this the style that Pierce the Veil is really going for on this record? And, first songs on albums are definitely not tone setters by any means, or that's not a common trend, especially in the alternative field. I feel like sometimes the first song isn't always necessarily a tone setter, but for this one, it ended up being that, where once I listened through the first time, I had to stop myself and say, all right, this is not what you expected from a Pierce the Veil record. Let's take a step back and let's listen to this with a new mindset or with a new view. And once I did that, it definitely started to make a little bit more sense. And like I said, it's not as heavy as you would expect a Pierce the Veil record to be per se. It more gave me the stadium rock vibes, or even more of a label friendly vibe is what I will say. Not saying that Pierce the Veil made this album just for the labels, but saying that it seemed something more that we would get from a band that has been under a label for a while, where the label might say, hey, why don't you try to go this direction, or suggesting things like that. So if that's what happened, never going to knock a band for trying something new. And I don't dislike this album by any stretch of the imagination. This actually is a very strong album. It's just not what you would expect necessarily. So there are songs on here where I actually heard snap tracks. And if you're not new to the country genre, you know that that is something that can drive fans crazy depending on what subset of fans you speak to, where you get a snap or a clap or a drum kit track over real drums. And I definitely was not expecting to hear that on a Pierce the Veil record, but we got it on Even When I'm Not With You, and we also got it on Shared Trauma, I believe, as well. And it's just something that you don't necessarily expect to hear on a rock band album. And it can be it can throw you off a little bit. So definitely strange to hear some of those different nuances in this album. It easily has one of my favorite songs of the year so far on there, in Emergency Contact. And Emergency Contact is basically about how, as you're growing older, everybody initially has their mom or their dad or their guardian as their emergency contact. And the song basically goes through the process of, now I'm with this new person and I want you to be my emergency contact. The same thing that everybody goes through. Everybody goes through changing from parent to either girlfriend, boyfriend, significant other, whatever it may be. They want to change them into their emergency contact. And something really cool about this song too is, if you go to iTunes, Pierce the Veil actually did a track by track breakdown on each song on this album. And when I was reading about Emergency Contact, one of the cool things that I saw was that they recorded this in a 100-year-old house. I think it's up in Seattle, and it was with one of the members of MXPX. And if you're not new to the alternative scene, you know MXPX has been around for a while now, and they were actually one of my favorite bands, one of the bands that got me into this genre. So really cool to see that some of these elder bands are still hanging around out there and still supporting the newer generation of these types of bands. So cool story on that one. If you want to check out the rest of them, like I said, head on over to iTunes. They have all of the track by track listings and some breakdowns from there. The other interesting piece from this album was the title track, Jaws of Life. Now, when you listen to this song, it almost gives you a sound bite or a sound like you are in a musical. It almost gives you that theater-ish type of vibe. So, hey, maybe Pierce the Veil the musical's coming. I don't know. But it was an interesting little twist that I really, again, the theme of this album for me was expect the unexpected from them. And while this is not an album that I will probably come back to a whole lot, as I said, Emergency Contact's one of my top songs of the year already. And it's interesting to hear a band try something new. Whether you think it works or not is totally up to you, but it's definitely an album I would recommend to go check out and see what you all think of it. And yeah, I think that's really all I have to say about Pierce the Veil, Jaws of Life. So go check it out. All right, so the next album that we had was You Me at 6, Truth Decay. This album was a stunner. I loved this album from You Me at 6. And they kind of start you off with a murderer's row of songs. The first 3 songs are 3 straight rock bangers that you can just nod your head to and just headbang along with. And the first song, Deep Cuts, really got you into it right away. I know that that was released as a single, I believe. So most people knew that, and it really got everybody started with that song. And then it rolls right into a song called Mixed Emotions. And Mixed Emotions might be my favorite song on the whole album. And it sounds to me like a story between two friends talking about how they had mixed emotions over their past and kind of mixed emotions about things going on in their life. You know, you get lyrics like strung out on the bed, can't handle this, and it's a song that makes you think a little bit, especially when you listen to it a little bit closer. I'm a big lyrics person, so I try to go back and listen and even read along with the lyrics sometimes. And this is one that, you know, it has such an up-tempo vibe and an up-tempo sound to it that you don't expect the lyrics to hit that heavy, but You Me at Six hits you pretty heavy with this song. So definitely my favorite on it. And then the third song on this album is a song called God Bless the 90s Kids. And this is a song where You Me at Six is just giving the respect to the 90s kids. And as a 90s baby myself, it's a really nice to be appreciated. And some of the lines in that song are really cool. You know, we get that the 90s kids write their own scripts and they never know when to quit. And definitely feel like that suits this generation that we have from the 90s, where we might not always do it by the book. We kind of do our own thing, but no matter what, we're never going to give up and we're going to do it our own way. And the coolest line on this was, they're the kings and queens of the underground. So that line is so cool to me because I took it as You Me at Six is really paying tribute to the 90s kids that brought this alternative generation to the forefront of the mainstream. In that time frame, we really didn't have a bunch of bands on mainstream radio. It wasn't until the late 90s, early 2000s where we started to see some traction for bands like Green Day, Blink 182. And that just rolled into the early 2000s, mid 2000s, where it kind of exploded into all these different bands that are now considered elder statesmen. Fall Out Boy, Good Charlotte, My Chemical Romance, Paramore, Panic at the Disco, all those different bands that just exploded onto the scene in the mid 2000s. That is a result of the 90s kids really bringing that to the forefront and basically diving right into this genre. So, You Me at Six, giving the 90s kids their flowers on this song. Such a good track on this album, and honestly, this album is an early album of the year contender for me. You know, I listen to albums a few times before I sit down and write a script for a podcast, and this is one that I threw on numerous times, and I'm still going to continue to listen throughout the year. It's an album where you can throw it on and just be like, you know what, I'm listening to You Me at Six today. Truth Decay is going to be on all day. I can roll through the entire album and not have to worry about skipping a track or worrying about, you know, this song. I'm really not feeling this song. And each time you listen to it, you kind of catch some different nuances as well. And that definitely happened to me, where I think it was the second or the third time through when I was listening to Heartless, I caught some other sounds with that. And one of the things that I did notice was You Me at Six has a very unique sound, and it's almost similar to Bastille. If you guys are fans of Bastille, listen to those two together and tell me that the lead singers don't sound a little similar, and that Truth Decay doesn't sound a little bit like some Bastille influences on that. But Heartless is a record that I heard, and it really kind of captures that feeling of loving someone and feeling like, you know, eventually they crushed you, but everybody loves, and no thoughts of moving on. Kind of, those are the kind of feelings that you get from that. And I like the way that they stylized it. They have heart in all lowercase, and then they have less in uppercase. And the final part of it is, I know you're not heartless, but your heart is just a mess. And I feel like a lot of times that can be true of people that have relationships that end. and they don't really understand why is, you don't always know what the person's gone through in their past, and that's exactly what this song's getting at is I know that this person isn't heartless. Their heart's just kind of in a mess, and that's why things didn't work out, or that is why things did not work out for us. So really cool track to get your mind thinking a little bit about those types of relationship situations. Overall, this was a fantastic record. I can't recommend it enough, and I can't say enough good things about this album from You Me at Six. Definitely one that y'all need to go check out. And these guys had potentially the best marketing tactic of a new release that I've seen in a while. So if you follow You Me at Six on any of their socials, you probably saw them promoting a toothbrush. And the tagline was combat tooth decay by listening to Truth Decay. And they were basically selling these toothbrushes that had their logo on it. And the proceeds from this went to I can't remember if it was an environmental foundation or something, but their proceeds went to some sort of charity. And I thought that was the coolest thing, that a band was able to turn their album title into something that they could help out the environment with and turn Truth Decay into Tooth Decay. Just such a cool concept to see from a band. So Truth Decay by You Me at Six, go check it out. All right, and our last album that we reviewed is actually an EP from a brand new band called Sleepless, and the EP is titled Bring Back Movie Quote Song Titles. This was an awesome discovery for me. So a lot of times people ask me how I discover new music or discover new artists, and the best answer that I have for that is you just got to look for it. And that means scrolling through playlists, scrolling through Spotify, going down to the end of a specific artist page and looking at who is related to them in terms of who just sounds like who. And so I was on Spotify scrolling through some playlists, and I came across a song called Surrender by this band Sleepless. And wow, they gave this EP, and this EP is a stunner. This EP is quintessential pop punk that we may be looking for. So this band's out of Canada, and if you're looking for a sound, or if you're looking for bands that are similar, the best bands that I can use to compare to Sleepless are, their style sounds a little bit like Simple Plan, State Champs, even Paramore a little bit in their earlier days. So if you're fans of those bands, you're going to love Sleepless. And these 5 songs are some of the best pop punk that I've heard in a while. So one of the songs is called My Serenade, and the tagline or the chorus is chasing misery has come to be my serenade. And that's just a really cool way to say that, sometimes the things that comfort me the most are the things that make me the most miserable. And so it was cool to hear somebody put a little twist on that type of a situation where you may say, look, I know I'm being stupid. I know that I'm chasing something that I shouldn't, but it's making me happy, or at least I think it's making me happy, but I know it's going to end up making me miserable. So cool to hear that on there. And just listening through these 5 songs, you're almost instantly transported back to that middle school, high school time frame where it's summertime. You can get in the car, maybe you just got your license, roll the windows down, throw in a new CD into the CD changer, and turn up the volume on songs like this and roll around singing a song like Friends Like Us. And Friends Like Us is such a cool song because this is a song where they're basically saying, you don't want friends like us. We never sleep. We drink too much. We don't really give a fuck about what's going on. And I would argue that those really are the type of friends that you want, because you're always going to look back on those times where you were doing those things and you may say to yourself, oh man, we were stupid to do that. But basically, you made memories with each other, and you know that those friends are going to be there with you forever. So even though Sleepless may say that they don't want friends like us, yes, you do. You want exactly those types of friends. But my favorite off of this EP is the one that introduced me to Sleepless, and it's a song called Surrender. Now, the first time I heard Surrender, I had to stop myself for a second because when I was growing up, there was a church song called I'll Surrender. And when I'm listening to Surrender by Sleepless, I went, uh-oh, is this a contemporary Christian version of that song? And it's not, but I had to stop myself for a second and say, uh-oh, is this something that I need to think back to my church days for? So Surrender is basically a song that is talking about everyone is afraid to love more than they are to lose love. And this is something that I feel like everyone goes through. Maybe it's a new relationship, maybe it's an old relationship, but once you surrender and just say, I'm going to try to love, I'm going to try to just let it be what it is, you'll end up surrendering to just this more positive lifestyle. You'll surrender to a better overall relationship. So it'll end up working out in the way it's supposed to work out, as the gist I got from Surrender. But man, what a find from Canada on this one. Sleepless is a band that has definitely popped straight into my radar, and I hope to hear more from them soon. And obviously they just released an EP, but once you find a band that you really like and you know that their sound is something that you really appreciate, you want more. So hopefully we get more from Sleepless soon. Go check them out. Bring back movie quote song titles, the new EP from Sleepless, out now. Give them a listen. That wraps up the albums for this week, so we will look now at some of the singles that we reviewed. Now, singles that we reviewed, you will be able to find them all in our Spotify playlist, which will be linked below. And even some more songs that may have not made the cut for the podcast will be in there as well. So let's jump right in with the first song that we listened to, and that was Lost by Linkin Park. Lost by Linkin Park is a song that was great to listen to, but it was also very difficult to listen to. So when people first heard that there was a new Linkin Park song that's coming out, I think the first question in everyone's mind was, is this a song without Chester? Is this a song with Chester? And lucky for us, it is a song with Chester. It's actually a lost tape from the Meteora era. So this was kind of like going back in time and being transported back to 20 years ago when that album first came out. And I really don't have a whole lot to say about Lost. Lost is a great record. It's absolutely incredible to hear Chester's voice on a song, and it's technically a new song for us, but it's also still this little blip in time where we're able to be transported back to 20 years ago. So definitely go check out Lost if you haven't already. And yeah, that's really all I can say about it, is go check out Lost. There's not much to say about it. It was, like I said, it was kind of hard to listen to, knowing that we don't have Chester with us anymore. And, I just hope that maybe we'll find some more Lost tapes like that in the future. Next single that we want to talk about is Do or Die from Magnolia Park, featuring Ethan Ross. If you follow Magnolia Park on any of their social media accounts, you know that they were teasing this song for the past week or so, and one of the things they kept saying about it was, is this the heaviest release of the year? And honestly, they might be on to something there. This is a very heavy song. Definitely something that I don't know that I was expecting right away from Magnolia Park, but it's such a cool concept of every time these thoughts flood your mind, it's do or die, and just don't let yourself drown in it. Just keep fighting those thoughts and end up on top. And I think it's one of my favorite Magnolia Park songs because of that message. So, do or die, go check that one out. Magnolia Park featuring Ethan Ross. Next track that we looked at was I Think I'm in Love by Taylor Acorn. Now, I was first introduced to Taylor when she was featured on Magnolia Park's Misfits, and I hadn't really heard a whole lot of her solo stuff. So when I got the chance to check out I Think I'm in Love, I was really excited to do it. And this was probably my favorite single release this week. And I think I'm in Love is really just a cool swell to me. And what I mean by that is when you get into the first verse and chorus, when you get to that transition piece where you go from chorus to second verse, it's almost a slow acoustic build. And then once the second verse takes off, you get the electric guitars built in and things like that. So that was a cool little nuance that I noticed in this track. But overall, her voice is incredible. The track itself is beautifully written. So can't say enough good things about it. Go check out I Think I'm in Love by Taylor Acorn. That leads us to our next track, which is Left Behind by The Plot in You. Left Behind's a really heavy track as well. And lyrically, it's all about getting rid of that toxic person in your life and leaving all their memories behind and not worrying about taking that into your future. And it also discusses how time can show the change in some people and they become more toxic throughout their time with you. And that's something that everybody can sympathize with. Everybody's had a relationship or two where over time it just develops into something that you just weren't expecting. You weren't expecting the person to be that way. And this is a song that if you've had that situation, you're going to listen to it and you're going to love it. So this is one of my first experiences with The Plot in You, so I'm excited to see what else is coming from them soon and hear more of what their style is. And the last track that we listened to was Alien by The Funeral Portrait. This song is awesome. This is one of those tracks that really helps set the alternative genre apart, because the alternative genre, people can feel like misfits or feel like aliens sometimes. And The Funeral Portrait captures that perfectly in this track. The Funeral Portrait in this track really is saying that everybody has these times where they just feel completely outcast, feel completely like aliens. And one of the lines in here really stuck out, and it was, if I were to die tonight, would anyone care, or would I just be weird? And unfortunately, in today's day and age, that is just something that really just hits all too close. And it's something that I feel like a lot of people struggle with, is being called weird, being called names, being called whatever it may be, and feeling so far outcast that they don't even feel like anybody would care if they weren't there. And that's just not the case. And as someone that has been called weird or has been called nerd or every name in the book, I can sympathize with that and say that it does get better. It does. Life does get better from whatever it may be. A lot of times people are feeling these types of things in high school where you feel like the alien or the outcast because you're a little different from each person. And maybe you're getting pressured or feel pressure to conform or feel pressure to be like everyone else in your school. And again, as somebody that's going through that, I can tell you that just because you're a little different or somebody thinks you're an alien, there are other aliens out there like you. And once you find that group, it is the best feeling in the world. Once you find people that enjoy the things that you enjoy, and once you find that set group of people, that is a great support system, and you won't feel like an alien anymore. And you shouldn't feel like an alien for being yourself, because being yourself is what sets you apart. You don't want to be normal, or you don't want to be just like everybody else. Normal's boring. So be your true alien self. And what a song from The Funeral Portrait. One of my favorites, and one of the best songs I've heard in a while that kind of breaches that topic. So Alien by The Funeral Portrait, go check it out. It's linked on the Spotify playlist that I mentioned before. So go check that one out. That wraps it up for music reviews this week, but we did have a couple of things in the news that I wanted to touch on. And the first one is our drummer, Lord Travis Barker. Good Travis. Gotta love Travis. He is going so hard in rehearsals for Blink-182's tour. And Travis went a little too hard and busted his finger. And if you follow Travis on social media, I'm sure you saw some of the videos of what his finger looked like. And basically, he busted some ligaments, and he might have broken a piece or some broken part of his finger. But in typical true Travis fashion, I'm pretty sure he was taped up and back in the studio the next day practicing. So good to see that nothing's going to hold Travis back. I didn't expect anything to, but just a thought to keep. Just wanted to mention that for any Blink fans out there that may have seen that and gotten a little worried. The big tour announcement that we saw this week came from Disturbed, and they are going on a headlining tour with support from Breaking Benjamin, Theory of a Dead Man, and Ginger. Pretty stacked lineup, if you ask me. Definitely one that, if it comes to your area, I recommend checking out. Those are some pretty solid bands that you'll probably have a great time at a show like that. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on some of the events that happened at the Grammy Awards. Obviously, if you are someone that only tunes into the main show, you may be a little surprised to see that there were no rock or alternative categories that were handed out at the main show. And as someone myself that watches all 92 awards being given out, which means I watched the pre-show, when they went through the rock and alternative categories and presented all of them, I was shocked, because I feel like this is the first time in a long time that we have not had at least one award for that genre given out during the main show. Now, who knows what their reasoning was for not having an award announced at the main show, but let's be honest, a lot of the artists that were nominated this year don't really reflect what the genre is today. Those awards that they gave out were more for the Ozzy Osbournes and the Brandi Carliles, and I think the metal went to Ozzy. So they kind of conformed more to the older generation than they did the newer. Obviously, we did make some progress with Machine Gun Kelly getting nominated for Best Rock Album. And whether you agree with him being in the genre or not, you can't deny the fact that he is kind of bringing the genre back to the forefront of the mainstream. So a little disappointing to not see any of the categories make it to the main show, but we'll see what happens next year. Hopefully we get some better nominees other than just getting Machine Gun Kelly and Turnstile nominated for awards this year. That just about wraps it up here for us on the Matrix Music Review podcast. I hope everybody enjoyed all of the content. I hope everybody goes and checks out all of our Spotify playlists. Give us a follow on the socials at Matrix Music Review. Stay up to date on all of the new music that's being released. Country fans, we'll see you next week with our first country podcast, where we will talk about Chase Rice, Matt Stell, Jordan Davis, and plenty of others. And hopefully I see some of you alternative fans back there as well. Hope you tune in for that one. So until next week, hope everybody has a great week, and I will see you then.